I'm Ben Meiselas from the MeidasTouch Network, and this is a breaking news alert. Donald Trump has filed an emergency application with the United States Supreme Court to try and stop the House Ways and Means Committee in Congress from getting his tax returns from 2015 to 2020. Last week, the Court of Appeals in Washington, D.C. for the D.C. Circuit ordered that Donald Trump's time is up. He exhausted all of his appeals up to the Court of Appeal level. Trump was set to have to turn over these records within 1 week of last week's ruling. So by the end of this week, Donald Trump has filed, though, this emergency application. It will go before Justice John Roberts, who is the United States Supreme Court judge who oversees the emergency orders emanating from the United States D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals. So it is now before John Roberts, and we will see what John Roberts does. Let me give you some background on this so you know what this case is about. First, there's another case in Congress where Trump has turned over other records. So this case involves Trump's tax returns, and it involves the House Ways and Means Committee, which is chaired by Richard Neal. The other case where Trump has turned over records involves financial filings from his accounting firm or former accounting firm Mazars. In that case, the House Oversight Committee was seeking those financial records. Carolyn Maloney is the chair, Democrat chair of the House Oversight Committee, and she received those records from Mazars, and a deal was struck essentially after Trump lost at every single level, the same way he's lost here with his taxes, but he's fighting harder not to turn over his taxes here. But a deal was made with the House Oversight Committee back in early September, so a little bit about 2 months ago, and those records were turned over to the House Oversight Committee. There was litigation there. Trump lost at every level. The House Oversight Committee has those financial records, but that's not the tax returns. And so what happened with these tax returns is the House Ways and Means Committee, which is chaired by Democrat Richard Neal, requested to get these tax returns from the IRS, which is a branch of the Treasury Department. And they asked back in 2019, and the Treasury Secretary at the time, Steve Mnuchin, rejected the request and said that Congress did not have any legitimate legislative reason to get these tax returns. And Congress said, yes, there's something called the Presidential Audit Program, which is under the auspices of the House Ways and Means Committee, and that we need to look at the presidential records because it's unprecedented. This is the only time where a president has not voluntarily turned over their tax returns, and we need, as part of our oversight of this committee, to see those records. Donald Trump intervened in a lawsuit that was brought in 2019. A lawsuit was filed by the House Ways and Means Committee against the Trump-led IRS at the time. Trump intervened in that case. Then you transitioned to the Biden administration. And in 2021, the Biden administration said, of course, this is routine. House Ways and Means Committee can absolutely have these records. And the IRS said they'd be willing to turn it over. So then Trump filed a counterclaim against the House Ways and Means Committee. And the case was before a district court judge named Trevor McFadden. Now, Trevor McFadden is a district court judge in Washington, D.C., who was appointed by Donald Trump. So Trump was in front of a Trump appointee who applied the law and ruled correctly that, of course, the House Ways and Means Committee has a legitimate legislative activity. That is what the House Ways and Means Committee is entitled to do under the separation of powers. They have their own oversight function, and they can get those records. Donald Trump then appealed that to the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, which oversees the D.C. District Court. And the D.C. Court of Appeals, in a unanimous decision, ruled against Donald Trump last August. And this is what they said in the ruling. And they said, as a general rule, while Title 26, Section 6103 of the United States Code makes tax returns and return information confidential, but their release is still subject to certain exceptions that are enumerated there. And one such exception, it says, upon written request from the chairman of the Committee on the Ways and Means of the House of Representatives, the Secretary shall furnish such committee with any return or return information specified in such request. And here, that was done. The chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, Richard Neal, requested it on April 3rd, 2019. That request was denied. In the request, he asked for the tax returns of Donald J. Trump, the Trump Revocable Trust, DGT Holdings, LLC, and a number of other LLCs, and the Trump National Golf Club and Bedminster, and all these other properties and entities owned by Donald Trump. This was denied by then Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin. And then it goes on to say that Congress, in this case the House Ways and Means Committee, has asserted a legitimate legislative explanation for why they want it. They have the presidential audit program that has existed for some time, and they are entitled to these records. And so in the decision that was reached last August, they said, yes, the House Ways and Means Committee can get it. Trump then appealed that in what's called an en banc, you spell it E-N space B-A-N-C, italicized, en banc appeal to the entire D.C. Circuit Court. So you go from a 3-judge panel, and then he asked the entire 10-judge panel to look at it and to review what the 3-judge panel did. The en banc panel did that. They rejected Donald Trump. So loser at the district court, loser at the Court of Appeals, loser at the en banc level. And Donald Trump also asked the en banc panel and the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals to stay or stop the enforcement of the House Ways and Means Committee getting his tax returns from 2015 to 2020 so that he can appeal to the United States Supreme Court and see what the United States Supreme Court does. The D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals rejected that. So Donald Trump lost again. So now, with all that context that you now have, Donald Trump filed an emergency application to the United States Supreme Court asking that the United States Supreme Court stay or stop the House Ways and Means Committee from accessing his tax returns until such time as there is a full certiorari hearing, a full hearing before the United States Supreme Court, which could take not just many months, but that could take years. And so what is Donald Trump trying to do here again? He's trying to delay with this emergency application. Watchers and listeners of the MeidasTouch Network will know that this process of seeking emergency applications in this type of fashion is referred to as the shadow docket. And increasingly under the Roberts Court, we've seen the Supreme Court making substantive rulings or rulings that appear procedural but are actually substantive in nature. For example, if Roberts were to grant Trump's relief here and stop the House Ways and Means Committee from getting these records, it would essentially have the effect of delaying it for such a long period of time as to potentially be outcome determinative, which is not what the United States Supreme Court is supposed to do, and it's an abuse of their shadow docket. But recently, we have seen cases, lots of them, where Trump has brought emergency applications where he has lost before the United States Supreme Court. So just recently, for example, in the Mar-a-Lago search warrant matter, after Donald Trump lost before the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, which directed the return of the 100 top-secret classified records to the Department of Justice, Trump filed an emergency application with the United States Supreme Court. There, Clarence Thomas is the supervising Supreme Court justice who sits over the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, and Justice Clarence Thomas there directed the ruling to the entire Supreme Court, who denied and rejected Donald Trump's request for emergency relief there, an application to partially vacate the motion for stay that was granted by the 11th Circuit, which returned the 100 classified records. So we'll see what John Roberts does here. We know the United States Supreme Court has a history with these types of Trump-related applications to deny them. We know that Trump lost at the district court judge level with a judge who Trump appointed. We know that Trump lost at the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals before a 3-judge panel. We know that Trump lost before a 10-judge panel at the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals. You now know the term en banc, which Trump lost there. So he lost at all of those levels. John Roberts will have that history. And so do I think that John Roberts will ultimately grant the relief that Trump is requesting? I don't. Do I think that John Roberts may temporarily pause the enforcement by the House Ways and Means Committee of getting these records, just so that briefing could be submitted? Possibly. Roberts can just reject it right away. What we've seen with the court doing recently, though, when these emergency applications are made, is to do a very temporary pause on the enforcement, get briefing on an expedited briefing schedule, and then make a ruling. So that would be my expectation of what could occur here. But ultimately, I believe that John Roberts will deny the relief that Trump is requesting, which would really block and pause the House Ways and Means Committee from getting these records for a long period of time. I think that the House Ways and Means Committee will get these records, not grant what Trump is seeking. And look, this will be the first time that these tax records will go to a public body. Trump has desperately tried to hide these tax returns from 2015 to 2020. And Trump's argument here, why the House Ways and Means Committee should not get it, is he says that it is not legitimate legislative activity. And he said, look, they just want it because they're going to post it publicly, and they're doing it to try to embarrass me, and that it raises separation of powers issues. Could you imagine if Congress goes and tries to get all the other president's records? Trump argues their other financial records and tax records. How bad would that be? To which the answer is not bad at all. All the other presidents release their tax returns. They're not shady, crooked individuals who use their position to violate the Emoluments Clause and to exploit our country and to engage in this transactional self-dealing and criminal behavior at the expense of our nation. When you are the president, you are a public figure. It is an expectation that your tax returns and that your financial records will be made public. Otherwise, don't run for that office. Don't run for that public position. Don't run for a position of public trust. It is actually not a separation of powers issue, unless the real issue is that there should not be separation of powers and there should be kings and emperors and fascist dictators, which is the subtext here, because in our democracy, we the people expect a level of transparency. Sometimes we want a great deal of transparency. I know I do, but I can settle for a significant modicum of transparency, which at the bare minimum, I'd like to know about the tax returns of a president to know that they are not selling out our country to foreign interests and that they are not engaged in crooked criminal conduct. I think that is a bare minimum threshold, which would not cause any separation of powers, but would actually preserve the dignity of the branches in our government. I'm Ben Meiselas from the MeidasTouch Network. Hit the subscribe button right now. We're on our way to 1 million subscribers thanks to your great support. So please subscribe right now. And in addition to hitting the subscribe button, please check us out at patreon.com/MeidasTouch, patreon.com/MeidasTouch. There's a number of exclusive content membership packages there with behind the scenes footage and exclusive podcasts and exclusive merch. And there's a tier where you could become an honorary producer of the MeidasTouch podcast and much more. But most importantly, we're not funded by billionaires or millionaires. We have zero outside investors. And so we are purely fueled by democracy, and we are powered by you and you alone. So no matter where you are in the world, if you can help out, that's a way you could help out. And no pressure, but if you can, join one of the membership tiers at patreon.com/MeidasTouch. Thank you so much. We will keep reporting the facts. I'm Ben Meiselas from the MeidasTouch Network. Have a great day.
At MeidasTouch, we are unapologetically pro-democracy, and we demand justice and accountability. That's why we're spreading our message to Convict 45. That's right, gear up right now with your Convict 45 tees and pins at store.MeidasTouch.com. That's store.MeidasTouch.com.